Good morning. I'm at the Reston Center. It's a hot morning. It's about 92 degrees. And I thought I'd take just a couple minutes and say a few things about Africa before 1500 for our History 111 course. Um, the first thing is that we have to recognize that we historians, archaeologists, scholars, are only slowly beginning to roll back and understand what occurred in Africa before 1500. And the primary hurdle has been a lack of sources, a lack of materials, and not only written materials, of which there is a complete lack, but also archaeological remains and even human remains, so that you could do DNA or forensic testing. And so, because of that lack of knowledge and actually a lack of attention, also, it's only slowly that historians and scholars have begun to study Africa before 1500 and determine what occurred there. Um, because of the lack of written sources, the lack of archaeological sources, scholars have come to depend on uh, linguistic evidence and food or crop production evidence. And both of these can be highly debatable, the conclusions that you reach from studying the materials. But the linguistic, by studying the language of Africa, the language of the peoples of Africa, you can determine where peoples originated and how they were related to one another. And so this becomes the primary evidence for what is called the Bantu migration. In addition to the linguistic evidence, scholars also study food and food production and where crops are grown, and to try and determine which peoples grew which crops in which regions. And this also allows scholars then to determine where peoples migrated from or where they originated. Um, and so those two, linguistic and food, have formed the basis for a lot of information that we have about Africa, but not all of Africa. The first thing that is obvious when you're looking at Africa is it's a continent that is oriented north-south. Because of that, it has a variety of distinct geographical and climatic regions. And so going from north to south, you go from the Mediterranean climate north of the Saharan Desert, the Sahara Desert itself, then sub-Saharan Africa, equatorial Africa, and then finally southern Africa. Um, each of those geographic regions have distinctive climatic conditions, and those climatic conditions largely determine what foods could be grown in those areas. And because of those food and climatic conditions, that also help to determine um, the level of population density that the region could support. Um, and so what you have then going from north to south is you have uh, distinct differences in the kinds of people, the kinds of political organization, the socioeconomic foundations of the societies as you go from the Mediterranean coast all the way down to southern Africa. Um, in many ways, the most interesting feature of African Civ is what scholars are now calling the Bantu migration. There's still a lot of controversy surrounding this, uh, but the essential idea behind the Bantu migration is that somewhere around 3,000 years ago, or 1000 BCE, the Bantu people living in what would be present-day Nigeria, Western Africa, migrated out of that region and spreading eastward and southward to eventually encompassing all of Africa from Nigeria southward and eastward over to the Indian Ocean. And so that always became part of, became populated by the Bantu peoples. There's a lot of controversy because scholars haven't been able to find real clear archaeological evidence of this, but it's clear from the present-day populations of Africa and linguistic evidence that the Bantu became the overwhelming majority of the peoples in Africa. And so, for my really brief remarks on Africa, there's more detailed information in the textbook. Uh, One of the key takeaways is the geographic climatic zonal structure of Africa, which helped to determine the specifics of the societies and populations as they arose in those parts of Africa before 1500. Okay, thanks.